Let's see. Now my watch here in the studio is 8:30, and I want to say good morning to everyone joining us for this presentation of the report that is a collaboration between AI Sweden, RISE, and Stockholm Resilience Center. The report name is AI in the Service of the Climate. And with us today, we have representatives from all of the organizations. We have representatives from AI Sweden, of course. We have representatives from Stockholm Resilience Center, from RISE, and also from Vinnova, who's been one of the funding the report. My name is Peter Kurtzweli, and I'm broadcasting to you live from Lindholmen Science Park here in Gothenburg. It's a very chilly and cold Gothenburg today, so if I look pale and white, that's because I am. So together today we will go through AI, the report and the findings in the report AI in the Service of the Climate. And this is, of course, hugely important. At AI Sweden, we've made this one of our major initiatives or major impact initiatives, because we really see that, of course, climate and climate change is of huge need. And we truly believe that AI can play an important role as a tool for us to better understand what is going on. So I'm really excited and interested in what we will present here today. With me, I will be joined by Thomas Bergendorf at Vinnova, who will talk a bit about the Vinnova situation and how Vinnova looks at it, and my colleague Eric Wilson, who's been the project lead for this report. And I want to say good morning to the both of you.
Good morning. It's cold in Stockholm as well.
Yeah, we also will have an international report here later from Maria, who's broadcasting to us live from England, where it's also cold. And then I guess Victor and Sverker, you'll joining us as well from Stockholm, right? Yeah. Yes. So hopefully we will get some news from both Gothenburg, Stockholm, and England today. But Eric, I want to start with you, just asking a question. How has this work been done, and why was it? Why did we start working with this type of report?
So we mainly been working with this during the autumn last year, together with Sverker, Victor, and Maria. And basically, Vinnova came to us and asked us, this is an important question for us, and we want to sort of pinpoint what can be done and what should be done. So that's sort of been the scope of this, if I try to simplify.
Yeah, yeah. And so, Thomas, we will start this hour we have where we are going into depth in the report. But first, so we will have Thomas presenting the Vinnova work and why it's important. And then we will have more of a report launch, a presentation by the authors and the people behind the report. And then we will end the hour with a panel discussion or a group discussion around the next steps and what we want to happen now. But Thomas, I want to start with you. Why is this important for Vinnova?
Well, the bottom line is pretty easy. I mean, we need to act on climate change. That's the big reason. It's one of the major challenges our society has in front of us. We're facing it today, and we need drastic measures, and we need to have drastic changes of our society. And we believe that AI can be a strong tool for us as a highly digitalized society with knowledge and data in climate and weather and those kinds of things. So we believe there's a good case for using AI to help us.
And what will we see this year and beyond?
Well, I will get to a bit more of that in the slideshow, but I can just sort of leave a hint and say that when we started our work, there was just two funding agencies. It's us and the Research Council of Formas. Now we are 4 governmental agencies in discussion, which is a sign of how important the national agencies believe this is. And we're discussing long-term collaborations. Of course, nothing is certain, but it's a highly important topic to a lot of us funding agencies. So I think without giving any promises, you can expect different sorts of initiatives from all of us.
Yeah. Great. And while you prepare your slideshow, I want to, because we are a bit over 100 participants joining, and more are joining as we speak. But I just want to introduce AI Sweden for those who don't know about AI Sweden. So AI Sweden is the governmental initiative to accelerate applied AI all over Sweden. And when we're talking about applied AI, it's really about applying AI for solving real world problems. And as of now, I can't think of a bigger problem or a more challenging problem than facing climate change. So having AI in the service of the climate, and we at AI Sweden believe is a truly important project and can really be a major impact initiative driven from Sweden. So Thomas, please take over the presentation.
Right. And if you could just verify that you actually see a slideshow.
Yes.
Good. Well, I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Thomas Bergendorf, and I work as a program manager at Vinnova. And I mainly work with digitalization of societal development. So basically how digitalization affects and changes our societies. And that means that I work with issues such as data, digital infrastructure, artificial intelligence. But there's always the connection to society. So everything's applied with societal benefit in mind. And I'm responsible for our work with AI in the service of climate, and also for giving AI Sweden, Stockholm Resilience Center, and RISE the task of producing this report. And so what is Vinnova? It's the Swedish National Innovation Agency. And we contribute to strengthening the innovational capacity of Sweden for sustainable growth. And we primarily do this through financing research and innovation projects. And every year we invest around 3 billion Swedish crowns to promote innovation, and mostly through financing in early stages where risks are great and the projects may not become reality without state funding. So we basically provide the opportunity for experimenting and testing without any demands of profitability. So you can see just before you can get into VC capital, you will come to us. And our work with AI in the service of climate doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's part of our concentrated effort within the field of AI. So having an entire AI program devoted to strengthening Sweden's position in AI. I won't delve deeper into that as we don't really have the time for that. I just figure it's good to know. And as I said during just before, we have been working mainly with Formas, the National Research Council of Formas, and they are part of all our work. And as I was going through when I was asked the questions on why we were doing this, then the bottom line is that we need to act on the issues of climate change, as climate change presents society with major challenges. Greenhouse gas emissions need to be significantly reduced to limit global warming and its negative effects. And Sweden has signed the Paris Agreement to keep warming well below 2 degrees, and that we will try to keep it at 1.5 degrees. And Sweden has also adopted a number of national targets for emission reductions. And we are in dire need of a conversion to a climate neutral society and to adapt society to the changes that we can't prevent. So the idea is to use data and knowledge about AI and climate in order to decrease greenhouse gas emissions and adapt society to climate change. But we also want to strengthen and cross-fertilize existing research and innovation environments in these areas to foster long-term collaborations. Though there has been and there still is a focus to get Sweden on the AI map of the world, we can't really compete with China or USA, for example. So while we work in elevating the general skill and innovation levels of AI in Sweden, we also have to figure out what Sweden's unique selling potential is. Well, can we find niches for Sweden? And there, of course, there won't be a single USP. We have to be clear about that. It's a multifaceted question. But we believe that part of the answer is that there is potential for Sweden to become a leader in using AI in the service of climate. And last year, we ran a call titled AI in the Service of Climate. At the end, 9 projects received funding of around just over 56 million Swedish crowns, evenly spread over decreasing emissions and adapting society to climate changes. The projects were spread over a number of themes, as you can see on the slide. Energy, drinking water, cloud modeling, infectious diseases, food production and agriculture, extreme weather, industrial production. And those more or less reflect the kind of themes that you see in the proposals that were sent in. But of course, that's the variety in those proposals were even larger with the mobility and buildings and those kinds of things. And along with the call, we also initiated this project to explore the connection between AI and climate, to map and explore the potential for AI in the service of climate in Sweden, but with an international outlook, as it's a global issue. We also wanted to find out whether there were any particular areas or domains within AI and climate with larger potential. Could be, for example, due to availability of data, to competence, or for any other reasons. And behind that latter question was an idea for the report to inform a second call of AI in the service of climate. Should we perhaps limit the themes for such a call? Should we limit it to, say, agriculture and forestry, or industrial production or energy? So that was the basic premise for initiating the report. And I just want to give you a head up to what happens next. And first of all, the authors of the report will present the report to a larger audience at Vinnova. And I have no doubt that will give rise to interesting discussions. And we are also using the report as a discussion material internally to sort of figure out the next steps. How do we approach AI in the service of climate? And in the beginning of March, so in just over a month, we will open the next call in AI in the service of climate. And last year, the call was run just by Vinnova and Formas, but this time, as I said, it's a collaboration between 4 governmental agencies: Vinnova, Formas, the Swedish Energy Agency, and the Swedish National Space Agency. And that collaboration, that it has been expanded, just goes to show how relevant these issues are, and that more funding agencies see the potential for initiatives in this area. And this also means that the budget for the call will be larger than last time, but I can't tell you how much until we actually open the call. And this call will focus solely on decreasing emissions. And last call, there were also opportunities to apply for the climate adaptation of society, but that will not be the case in this call. And before you get too disappointed, we are also working with Formas on climate adaptation within the built environment and spatial planning. And the call is part of a joint call between Formas and Vinnova within the frameworks of national research programs for sustainable spatial planning and for climate. And the joint call consists of 2 separate calls where it's possible to apply for up to 4-year research projects through Formas and for 2-year innovation projects through Vinnova. And more information about both calls will be available soon. And currently there's a sort of a basic information, as you can see on the slide, available at Formas' site. Only in Swedish, but I think that will be remedied soon. So as the last sort of speaking point is, you have this spring you will have several opportunities to work with AI and in the service of climate, and you have opportunities to work with climate adaptation as well. So get started.
Great, Thomas. Thank you so much. We do have a question from the attendees or from the audience. Where can they find the granted projects from last year's portfolio?
There's a page at Vinnova where you try to find current calls, where you can also find old calls. If you find the old call, on that page, at the bottom, you'll find all the projects that have been financed.
Great, thank you.
And if you have problems finding them, just send me an email.
Super. And I want to encourage everyone among the attendees that do have a question, please use the Q&A function, just as Sebastian did here, so that we can bring up your questions to the panelists. But Thomas, thank you so much for sharing the Vinnova view of the report and why it's important.
I will leave a link in the chat as well for the page.
Super, great, thank you so much. And we will move over to our presentation of the report. And I would like us to go around the table just to introduce ourselves. And Victor, I would like to start with you.
Yes, thanks. So my name is Victor Galaz. I'm Deputy Director at the Stockholm Resilience Center and one of the authors of the report.
Maria.
Hi everyone, I am Maria. I am a PhD student working at Stockholm Resilience Center and the University of Gävle, also collaborating with the University of Exeter.
Sverker.
Sverker Jansson, a research leader at RISE Research Institutes of Sweden and also head of the RISE AI initiative.
Yeah. And Eric.
Lastly, me, Eric Wilson, which is a product manager at AI Sweden.
Yeah. So Eric, you've been in charge of the report, or the project lead from our side. But Victor, I would like to start with you. Can you tell us something about the biggest learnings within working with this report?
That's a big question. But I mean, I would say for me personally, and I think it comes out also in the report. Let me just focus on what's on the slides, right?
Yep.
I think if just summarizing the key findings here, and I should say to the audience, it is a very rich report. There's a lot of detail in the report, etc. But one way to summarize it, the first point is that the possible applications of AI for the climate challenge are very, very diverse. And that to me is an important message, because at some points, people or organizations expect us to find one AI application in one sector that has one big impact. And I don't think that's actually the case. The second point, which is related, is that at the moment, it's quite difficult to estimate what are the climate benefits from increased uses of AI in terms of megatons or gigatons of carbon reduction, etc. There are some estimates out there that we refer to in the report, but I would say those are quite advanced guesses rather than very solid analysis. You can see this as a problem, saying that we actually don't know whether AI would be of help for the climate challenge, or you can see this as an opportunity, that at the moment, actually the opportunities of AI for the climate challenge are not quantifiable, but they might be very big. The third point that we raise is that actually Sweden has done and invested considerably in AI infrastructure, expertise, and research, but very few of these initiatives have a clear climate profile. Again, you could see this in a negative or a positive way. I think the positive spin of it is that actually there is a lot of investment in Sweden. Adding something on top of that would create synergies and drive innovation in this space. And the fourth key finding that I would like to raise is the fact that there are a number of obstacles, of course. Some of them have to do with funding. Some of them have to do with a lack of vision in Sweden in this domain. But a third point that I think is important is that we actually don't have the competence of people with the capacity to move between these two worlds that are able to combine both deep climate science insights with AI expertise. And these two communities are working a little bit in parallel, and the skills to bring them together is missing at the moment, besides from other obstacles. So those are the findings. If we can go to the next slide. There we go. So the recommendations, again, these are a very condensed version of the recommendations. I think it is possible with a clearer goal and incentives by research funders, by public agencies in Sweden to mobilize people to tackle the big climate challenges using AI. I think that could be defined clearer, invested in, and that would create some momentum. Of course, investments would be needed, but I don't want to overemphasize investment. I mean, of course, scientists will always say we need more research, but that's not the point. I think there is a strong infrastructure in Sweden, strong competence. By adding to that, you can create quick synergies. That's at least what we think, and that we explain in the report. And then the third point, again, is just commit to innovation in this space, integrate the AI, climate, and sustainability community in a very clear way, make sure that we identify and make visible inspiring examples of where AI actually has worked to help us solve something tangible in the climate domain. Data, of course, access, collection is key, but then also a point on improved visualization tools. So that to me would be the very, very short version of what we have presented in the report.
Great, and this is some really interesting insights and some good recommendations. But to be a bit more concrete, do we see any use cases of AI in the service of climate today? What can we say about that, and what can we not say?
I mean, in general, as I said, I think it is very difficult, even though there are some estimates on that, to make an aggregated estimate of the number of gigatons reductions, etc., that you can get. But I think one way that we approach this and that we discuss this in the report is, as you can see here in the figure, that there are a number of applications in the climate domain that you can see in two dimensions. So the first dimension is that is the application something that targets one particular sector? So just say energy, transport, or monitoring of wetlands. And then the other dimension is whether these applications are multi-sectoral. So in fact, they could have impacts in many sectors in society. And then the other dimension is essentially, what are you doing with that technology? Is it about monitoring or analysis? Is it about climate mitigation, climate adaptation? And in the last phase, which is much more difficult, of course, climate innovation and transformation. And I think a lot of the innovations we're seeing now would be focused on a single sector, one single technology to, I mean, let's say an AI system to help you reduce energy consumption in one building, for example. Something that would be applicable in many sectors. So now we're talking about multi-sectoral analysis and monitoring, improved climate models that are much more refined, that can help cities to monitor what's happening better in terms of climate change, or predict extreme weather events, for example, that might be of use for a government, for example. And then on the other extreme end, if we think about innovations that could help redirect capital, create new infrastructure, create new business models, those would be more on the side of innovation and transformation in multiple sectors. And those are much more difficult, of course, to identify. There are some interesting suggestions and examples, but nothing that you can really show and measure it to a big impact. But I think it's very important for me and for us to really see the full breadth of potential of AI technologies across these two dimensions.
And talking about dimensions, we're talking here about Sweden taking a leading position in working with this, or the potential of Sweden taking a leading position. And Sverker, I would like to move over to you. What is happening in the world? Who is in the forefront of the work that's being done within AI and climate right now?
So that's a good question. Of course, it's, globally recognized that the potential of AI and more generally digitalization for tackling climate change. I would like to point out for the attendance here a very influential report which can be found at climatechange.ai, Tackling Climate Change with Machine Learning, which is written by 22 very strong researchers and well-known organizations in late 2019. Which outlined a wide range of applications, and about at the same time, a series of top-notch, so to speak, workshops of AI and climate change were initiated at leading AI conferences. And the list of these and pointers to the publications can also be found at that site. So if we move to the next slide, I think this is maybe a little bit hard to read, but we talked about the extremely broad range of applications and sort of possible sub-questions when we talk about climate, handling climate change. It's so broad. Victor already mentioned this. It's so rich. There are so many different sub-problems. And this report that I mentioned does an excellent job of, I would say, of analyzing this in terms of 13 general areas and many sub-problems, and also looking at the possible interactions between these areas or uses of different AI technologies. And I can only speak from if we back to the previous one just a little bit. So we need to understand that each of these areas, each of the sub-items here and the sub-items of the sub-items are huge, rich domains of expertise. When we talk about electricity systems, it's an enormous area, lots and lots of different problems and lots of progress on making dynamic, resilient, efficient energy systems for future fossil-free energy sources. And so AI for all of these challenges does not happen in a vacuum. We need to keep in mind that to make anything interesting happen, we need to combine top-level expertise in these areas, in these application areas, with the AI expertise, and only then will we see any real progress. Next slide, please. So one thing we did in the report, just to sort of take the temperature on what is going on in top-level research internationally, was to look at the publications at these workshops and just did some statistics, just to what kind of topics are being addressed and what problems do the authors, the researchers see with this. And just to highlight the most obvious finding, and you can find more in the report, it's so clear that the areas being targeted by academic researchers at this point are mostly those where it's easy to get data. This does not necessarily, and which are easy to understand somehow. Weather, okay, let's do something with weather. It's a caricature. And the problem they mention is the lack of data. On one hand, one can think of addressing this by making more data available, but the real data becomes available in the collaboration between the domain experts and maybe companies and organizations that produce the data and the AI researchers. And that's what we need to see happen. So that's my response to the question.
Yeah, really interesting. But when talking about AI, data always comes up to the table, because we really need to fuel AI with data. So, and Eric, this might be a question for you because you've looked into this a bit further. If the only problem we do have is to give data to researchers, why aren't we doing that?
That's a good question. I think the challenge is that it is multifaceted question. So I had the opportunity to try to pinpoint where is all the available Swedish climate-related data? And it's a pretty tough question because first off, what is climate-related data? What comes to everyone's mind is usually what's available, as Sverker said, the weather data and satellite data, which is great data sources, and that's why we've seen different innovation in this field. But you also come to think about emission. But the challenge here to create any value of the data is that there's so much different data streams that could be combined to create innovation in this space. For instance, my personal transaction data from my spendings can be combined with looking at the climate footprint of the goods I purchase, which can also then be used in this space. So some of the key findings in this was that there's a lot of actually data out there, but it's usually, in my view, rests in a dusty corner of the internet. And data doesn't really get any value until you either find it or you combine it with a visualization tool that sort of highlights the value of the data. So I think that's one of the messages I want for you to take home. And one example is that, for instance, the Swedish power grid agency or owner, all of their data is available where you can go online here to the Swedish Kontrollrummet and see Swedish power consumption and energy production. But then it comes another player, let's say for this example, the startup Tomorrow, which combines all these open data sources globally and then create an interactive map of global energy production. And you can see how green your country's energy production is. And then the data that sits in a corner, say, gets another value. So that's sort of one opportunity we'll also see here. But I also want to stress that Sweden has a great culture in sharing data. Most of our public organizations do share the data today. So that's great. And we also see sort of reports coming out and a shift towards that we should start sharing data more freely. So I just want to stress that a lot of is being done, and we have the great initiative called DIGG or digg.se, which is sort of a data catalog of open data sources in Sweden, which we also cover in the report. So yeah, it's a complicated question, and it's almost a catch-22. Either you start creating the generated data source, and then you wait for the user to create a value of that data, or you have a clear mission and vision, and then you start going after the data. So I cannot answer what comes first.
But you're in a field there where we're talking about the Swedes or Sweden and organizations in Sweden have a culture of sharing. So what does the industry, because we also got questions about the industry sector there in the Q&A section. So what does the industry say about this? How eager are they to share data in the service of climate?
Right, so that's a good question. I think, so what we did was we created a survey as part of the report that we not only sent out to the industry, but also the academia and the public sector. But it was also, it came back there that also the industry is asking for more data and more accurate data. And I guess that's sort of the follow-up problem when you start looking into or start working with AI, that more data is always needed. So that's sort of just a conclusion that goes as a red line through the report. But other key findings from the survey was that, so we sent this survey out to 160 institutes, organizations, and roughly 40% answered. And this was the purpose to just take the temperature. What are they doing combining AI in the climate challenge? And one of the key findings was that, so 40% answered, and 50% of these actually had live projects, either looking into emission reduction or climate transformation projects, combining these two, AI and the climate challenge. So that's really positive news. But not only did they ask for more data, but another conclusion was that they said that we need to increase our knowledge about this field. Both academia, we need to get the people that knows either like AI in one corner and climate challenge in one, we need to get them to start talking. And the industry said that we need our customers to know about this and know the value of it, because then we can shift focus of our company to approach the need of the market. So again, complex question they are finding.
Yeah. And talking about complex, therefore I want to move over to Maria, because you represent Stockholm Resilience Center, you represent Stockholm University and also Gävle University. So we have the industry sector, and then we have the public sector that will hopefully, or they already share a lot of data. But what is happening within the Swedish universities? What is being done within Swedish universities?
Thank you for that question. So during this project, we looked at the different universities in Sweden and looked into the different types of research that is going on in the world of academia. And what we found is that there is, of course, a lot of different research activities going on that relate to either climate or to AI. And we found that the activities are spread out over a large number of different universities in Sweden. We saw in some universities, of course, there are larger hubs that are focused on either climate or AI. And at some universities, we found smaller projects that weren't connected to quite as large hubs. But overall, the activities can be found at universities basically across the entire country. This diversity can contribute to important experiences and knowledge, both within climate and within AI research. But we also found that all these activities they represent a potential, but that potential can be better harnessed by a more systematic approach to the research that is ongoing. And we found that it seems today that it's actually quite few of the researchers that focus on sustainability that also include AI in their research, either as the focus or as methods. And it also seems that few of the AI activities have the climate challenge as their central framework or aim. And so our findings indicate that although Sweden is a leading nation in sustainability science, primarily perhaps, and we also have highly interesting and within some disciplines leading AI research too, those two fields are not entirely combined today, and the potential is not yet harnessed. So it felt promising to see how much that is currently ongoing and to discover this potential. And there is a lot to build on, and now just remains to take that step.
Interesting. So we can be one of the leaders within sustainability research, and then we need to add AI. And Victor, you joined us for Sweden Innovation Days when we had that, and what was fascinating, the pre-work to Sweden Innovation Days, when we were setting up the themes and looking into what we were supposed to discuss. One area or one thing we did was to ask a lot of like international contacts we do have. So what do you think about when you think about Sweden? And then sustainability came up as a word. They didn't go any further into the theme, but they thought about sustainability. They thought about like the green Sweden. But why is Sweden? Why do we care? Why are we expected to be good in this area? And how does internationals or other countries look at us when it comes to sustainability?
I mean, I would say, and also speaking to international experts on this topic, Sweden has a good reputation in the environmental and sustainability area in general. And I think that comes from a very high profile on policy issues and climate issues, etc. I mean, we also look at the science in Sweden, even though Sweden is a small country, there's lots of leading groups in these research areas. So I think that's a second good point. And then the third thing that I see that international communities took upon in Sweden is responsible deployment of technologies, and that Sweden could play a role in that too. Meaning, what are the impacts in society? How do we make sure that this is done in tune with the Sustainable Development Goals, for example? I think the high international profile of Sweden on those topics and the expertise gives us a little bit of a niche in this space.
Yeah. What's your take here, Sverker?
Definitely, and also our industry with complementing technologies. We need to understand AI happening in a sort of a context of digitalization and communication technologies more generally, which also contributes to solutions for climate change. So, yeah.
Yeah. So it's really a responsibility, both in terms of the Swedish people, but also having major industries working globally, I figure, and can really have an impact in their ecosystem as well. But when we're talking about AI and data, legislation often comes up as a challenge. We need to incorporate or involve the legal entities early on to understand what we can do and what we're not able to do. But Maria, is legislation and policies a problem within this area as well?
Well, we have several different levels of legislations that we need to take into consideration. We have Sweden's national legislations and policies, where we have, for example, the svenska miljömålen, the Swedish environmental objectives. We have an AI strategy. We have a digitalization strategy. We have quite advanced legislations and policies, both within the area of climate and digitalization, and to an extent AI. If we then go up a level to the EU level, then we have the new framework program, Horizon Europe, which was launched now this year, where they, for example, have an innovation fund of 100 billion euro. We have the new EU, the financial recovery instrument, Next Generation Europe. We have the program Digital Europe, which has been launched by the EU Commission, where they have reserved 9.2 billion euro. So lots of related and exciting initiatives are happening both in Sweden and at the EU level. If we go up to the global level, we have the Global Paris Treaty, we have the Convention on Biological Diversity, we have the Sustainable Development Goals, and we have a range of guidelines for ethical use of AI. And those ethical guidelines are often developed by different companies or institutes, so they are often developed separately from each other, but a lot is happening in that area. So without going into too many details here, I think if we were to conclude, we could say that we see a rapid and extensive development of international policies and framework, both within the field of climate and sustainability, as well as within AI. And all these different initiatives, they do to a certain extent overlap, but today we see a lack of a clear international arena where these different initiatives can gather. And Sweden has clear prerequisites to become leading within this field and be able to harness this potential and collect the different initiatives the different initiatives and capacities that are out there. So the legislation is there to an extent, but there's a lot to build on.
Yeah. And talking about this being global efforts, that everyone is really shining a light on this. Sverker, you've been talking to a lot of experts in the field. What do they have to say about the Swedish potential within this field?
So all of us interviewed several selected people from industry and academia and so on. I would like to just mention one, actually, a highlight that I think is worth raising here. So because of and if we will not mention any names because that was part of the agreement for the interviews, but because of the deep complexity of the climate change challenge and the vastness of areas that are affected and the effects of climate change, a huge challenge is just making the scope of this understandable, the effects understandable, the effects of policy understandable, and so on. And so AI, it was suggested, and I think this is an excellent idea. AI could be a very powerful tool for collecting and interpreting the data around climate change, about the change itself, the various activities that we do to try to affect it, the predicted effects of policy and so on. And not only at the sort of a global level, which is always very abstract, regardless of how many we predict will die at the other side of the globe, we don't really think about it, but project it into our own reality, our own everyday life, what this will mean economically for our retirement pension funds and so on, for the fish we can find when we go fishing in a lake nearby in 10 years. What will happen very specifically to us? Their AI could make a huge impact. Otherwise, I leave to Victor maybe to continue commenting.
Thanks. I mean, the expert interviews were very interesting. I mean, and as Sverker mentioned, there were many different types of experts from different parts of society and different expertise. But I think it was quite clear that people saw this as an exciting arena, an arena that was growing very rapidly, where the community really hadn't taken on the climate challenge in its full richness. And the potential for someone or some groups to step in and define a clearer, exciting agenda. I mean, that would be my takeaway from the interview.
Yeah, so just to conclude, we're talking a lot about collaboration. So we're talking about getting the classical triple or quadruple helix together, where we generate data, we have the industry, we have the public sector, and we have the private sector, and then you also have the research community that needs that data to be able to provide solutions. But what would be the conclusion of this report, and what would be the, let's say, what will this lead us to? You're talking about the national arena, Victor, but what do you want to see happen now?
I mean, I'd like to see a clearer mobilization, I believe, around this, a clearer mission and vision, a clearer mission-oriented innovation agenda in this space that is very diverse and rich, that doesn't lock us into particular sectors or particular technologies, and something that is able to manage and balance risks created by AI, because I think those are there too, and transform them into opportunities. I think that, to me, is how we can go about to do this.
Yeah. So Eric, as a project lead for this project, now we've heard the conclusions of the report. We should mention that this is only a start. It's not a start using AI for the service of the climate, but it's a start of this work. So we need a clear vision and a mission, and we need a national arena. What would you say being the next step now?
Yeah, so the next step is exactly that. So today we're announcing that AI Sweden, RISE, and Stockholm Resilience Center want to take a leading role in this. We want to follow up on the conclusions we make in the report. And one of the sort of the biggest conclusion is that we need this arena that we've been talking about, where we gather the people with different expertise and we bring in the examples. So hereby we're announcing that we're going to take the lead in setting this up, investigate what's needed. And the purpose of this arena is clearly that we want to accelerate the climate transformation in Sweden. So this is for Sweden, and also improve on climate innovations. So that's our suggested next step. And here's a clear ask to the audience. We want you to reach out to us if you want to be part of developing what this arena contains and how it will operate, and where the biggest impact is that we're going to start working with. So that's our concrete sort of next step action that we start working with, but we're also reaching out a hand to you in the audience. So any thoughts on that, Victor, regarding what we more can do in this space as a next step?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. And I mean, I think this flows out quite natural from the report, the need for such an arena, and as Eric mentioned, a welcome to others to join and contribute as what I see as very tangible next steps that need to be discussed when creating such an arena, first of all. And I mentioned that already. What's the mission and vision of that arena? How do we concretize it? How do we make sure that it's inspiring and that it's able to transform risks into opportunities? I think we would need to set up very tangible task forces in this domain. So let's say, and I'm just making this up now, AI for sustainable finance, or AI for energy, or AI for transport, AI for biosphere stewardship, for climate adaptation. And I think those task forces should be defined as innovation arenas where people can join and contribute with their interests, skills, data, etc. I think there is a need for this arena to educate and communicate in this space. There is an interest, but a lack of skills. So how do we make sure that we take people through a journey of learning and where these skills are developed in a good way, and we get these communities together to communicate in new ways. And the last point that I also flagged to Erik and Sverker and Maria, we don't have a good name yet. So I think the arena needs a good name. So help out with that, please.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a clear ask from us to you in the audience. I've written my email here in the slides, so I hope you will spam me down with interest, and then we'll take it from there, clearly. Thanks.
Super. Thank you, Eric. And I think we can let the information stay there. I want to move over to just a quick Q&A session, because we're getting a lot of good questions in the Q&A function here in Zoom. But a lot of them is about collaborationship. So what will you say when you investigated this? How interconnected are the joint efforts for improving climate change? Are countries working together, or is it isolated projects from country to country?
I can try to answer very quickly. I would say that they are partly disconnected, to be honest. So for example, I see Germany has moved into the space a little bit. The UK has designed its own AI strategy where climate change is part of it. We see a number of institutes popping up around the world that's becoming connected. The only connection that I see at the moment would be through the United Nations system. So you will be seeing some conferences coordinated through UN agencies on AI for good or AI for the planet, where some of these initiatives converge momentarily. But I wouldn't say there's a lot of coordination, just very loose, what we call self-organization.
Okay. Do we see any successful collaborationships between academia, public sector, and the industry, for example, if we go down to a more national level? And what if we have successful projects or successful collaborationship, what constitutes those? What makes them successful? And that is an open question.
Sverker, do you have any thoughts, or Thomas, perhaps?
What's the best?
If we narrow down to I mean, Sweden is well known for strong collaborations of this kind in all sorts of sectors. One of the key findings, I would say, of this report is that we are still in early days when it comes to really combining the power of AI and tackling the climate challenge. And I think Vinnova, maybe Thomas would like to comment on that, what you have seen in the response to your calls.
Well, I think you're sort of spot on, I'd say. It's early days. I mean, I think the report partly shows that it's early days. For example, the report found that it's hard to sort of figure out the different potential for AI in the different sectors. And so we need to dig further. So it's just a new field. And we could see that in the proposals as well, that it's sort of feels like the AI experts are getting together with climate experts and finding a problem owner, and they're kind of trying to gently feel their way and understanding how to work together. So it'll be interesting to see this next call and see how the maturity has improved between these calls. But I'd still like to say that those projects that we funded have huge potential to be sort of, shining examples of what can be done. They're all interesting in their own right. They all have high levels of being interesting. What is kind of unclear is the actual potential. So it's the same kind of question that we had problems with. The same kind of question that's hard to answer is what is the actual potential of this of a solution on a local scale, a regional scale, and a national scale, and then even further on an international scale, because it's so highly context dependent on the electricity mix and other issues like that. So it's a very hard question to answer.
Yeah. Thomas, I just want to, we got a question regarding the coming funding in the Q&A as well. Will the coming funding allow multi-international collaborations, or is it just Swedish entities?
Well, yes and no. International organizations are, of course, welcome to take part. We encourage that, but they cannot receive funding from us. So they will have to find other kinds of funds, their own funds, or however they want to do it.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And before we're wrapping up, just one final question, because AI is often used as of course, it's a big hype around AI because we truly believe it being a very powerful tool. But talking about tools, it's often what we often do is that we silos tools, and we see that we do the same thing within organizations and the same thing within research, that we take them one by one. So what's the solution there? How do we get ourselves to collaborate more on a cross silos, cross industry, cross research way? What would you say the solution would be there, Sverker?
I think we need large initiatives in Sweden that bring all of these actors together around very concrete joint goals that involve klimatomställning in Swedish. I mean, it's easy to talk about climate science. Climate science is understanding climate change, but what we need to do is climate mitigation and adaptation at a large scale. And for that, I think we need flagship projects that bring all sorts of players together, and very concrete flagship projects like putting someone on the moon or creating a new fighter jet. I mean, of that level of concreteness that we are to achieve together. That I think will really accelerate matters.
Yeah, that really connects to what Victor said earlier about creating a very clear vision and mission and how we move forward together. So concluding and wrapping up, because we're just about to finish, what would you say moving forward? What was your biggest insights working with this, and what will you take with you in the next step? And I want to have 1-2 sentences each, and starting with Maria.
Thank you. I would say what I take with me from this is the realization of how many puzzle pieces are already available and how it seems logical to provide, like you say, a strategy, a vision and a mission, to just provide those puzzle pieces that can tie the whole puzzle together. So lots of potential. That's what I'm taking with me from this.
And Victor?
I've said a lot of things already, so I'll be brief. I think timing. So that would be the timing is good to do something on this now. There's interest. There are skills that need to be brought together, and there seem also to be some funding coming up in the next few years on this, so that we can build something together now.
Yeah, let's build it now. Thomas?
My takeaway from the report is it's just twofold. And the one part is sort of a confirmation that our basic idea of there being a potential for Sweden and within AI and the service of climate is correct. That's the first takeaway. And the other takeaway is there's so much more we need to learn and so much more we need to know. So we have to start digging for and finding ways of discovering the potential and figuring out what the next steps will be and establishing arenas. But how this will happen, that's a point for discussion in the future.
And Eric?
I agree to what others said. What I take with me is that, to me, the next step is clear. We just need to start. The time is good. The interest is there. We get a lot about just showing different examples and use cases for other sectors to each other, and then you can start from there. So that's my takeaway.
And Sverker, last but not least.
So my takeaway is that we will start at home. RISE has 3,000 people. We will work on AI solutions for the climate change challenge in all areas at RISE from all aspects possible, covering a large part of the Swedish industry and society challenges.
Great. So moving forward, it's all about getting to action, start collaborating, and really start working together and having a clear vision, doing moonshot projects. And just so you know, if you're interested, be sure to contact Eric. You saw his email earlier. You can also write us here in the chat. It will stay open a couple of minutes more. And look at the report. I know there's an executive summary in the report in English, and the report will hopefully be on all of the project sites. So just look at ai.se, for example, where you can download the report and get in contact with the group. So to all the panelists, thank you for joining. Thank you for this super important work. I hope that we will have this again within 6 to 12 months, where we really can start talking about the joint forces at the National Center. And thank you to all of the attendees joining here today. Please, if you're interested, reach out, and I hope to see you soon again. Have a great Wednesday.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.